Okay. Hey, George, how are you?
Fantastic, Jeff. Thanks for the invite today.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you. Thank you for being on the podcast. George, you've got great experience because you've seen this startup stuff from a couple of perspectives. You've been an entrepreneur, built your own businesses, and then for a number of years you've advised founders and entrepreneurs, and I'm sure you've seen the movie over and over again. So what we're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about are the characteristics that you've observed must be in a startup employee. So for someone to come into a startup, what am I looking for? How do I minimize the risk that they're not going to work out? And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about how to pay them, because as any startup entrepreneur knows, or even someone who runs an early stage company, money's always tight, budget's always an issue, especially with Rockstars who tend to command a premium in the market. So we'll talk about that as well. Sound good?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so why don't we start with what you've observed are the key characteristics, the common threads that startup rock stars seem to share, and maybe you can give some examples along the way. Why don't we just start with one or two and go from there?
Yeah, perfect. To me, there's maybe 4 or 5 things that kind of stand out in terms of the most important things for getting the right hiring for startups. The first thing, it all starts with, what is the right skill set? You're hiring for a particular position. Let's say you're hiring for a chief marketing officer, head of marketing. You want to make sure that that marketing person has the right skill sets for that job. Not only are they a marketer in their past, but do the marketing tactics that they used for their past business, are they relevant for your business?
So give an example of a marketing person that might not have the skill sets. What would I be looking for potentially in a startup situation?
Yeah, perfect. I ran into this trouble at one of my old companies I worked at. I went and hired a Fortune 500 executive team, and I brought in a marketer with Kellogg's and Procter & Gamble experience that knew how to spend really big budgets, with secretaries and expense accounts and everything else.
Yeah.
So, they didn't really know how to roll up their own sleeves and do the marketing activities themselves in the trenches and set up their own Google pay-per-click campaign, etc. So, knowing that they have actually lived in the trenches for the specific skill sets that are required for your stage of growth.
Got it. So they've been successful in a similar environment with similar resources, similar challenges.
Yeah, for sure. I think the second part of that is have they worked in a startup before? Because if you're a marketer, as in this example, you want somebody that knows how to be a good growth hacker.
Right.
How do they know how to stretch pennies into manhole covers and uncover some free viral marketing activities?
So does that mean, just to take it to its extreme, George, that you will not hire someone who's never worked at a startup before? I mean, I'm sure there's always exceptions, but would you say that's a basic rule? You don't want to be their guinea pig?
Well, I would say I would really grill them pretty hard first before I would hire them. I wouldn't say no is a big word. If I'm the right personality fit and some of these other skill sets you're looking for, sure, I may take a risk on them, but if I had a pool of resumes to choose from, I would choose the one that had the closer skill set. And
why is that? And it sounds like a silly question, but is it because they understand limited resources? Is it because they know they're going to like a startup because they've done it before? You want someone who's failed before? What are you looking for?
I think you just nailed a couple really good examples in your question, right? They have lived through the startup battle before. They know what they're getting themselves into. They know the budgets are going to be tight. They know they're going to have to stretch resources, that they're not going to have big teams, and they're up for the challenge.
Got it. Okay, so that's one characteristic. Let's talk about another one. What's another example of something that you feel, universal, is kind of a universal truth?
Yeah, I think it's making sure you got a good personality fit with the people around the table. You don't want that pariah that's going to be in the organization capturing all the lightning bolt of energy of everybody in the office.
Right.
You're going to be spending so many hours with these people around the clock working that you want to make sure they can actually get along with the people you're working with for sure.
And so do you do that with personality testing or profiling, or how do you, it sounds easy, but how do you assess that?
It's funny, more and more startups these days are actually using personality tests to kind of at least get a flavor for the candidate that they're looking for.
Yeah.
I personally have not looked at the personality test, so to say. I've just kind of used my own gut.
Yeah.
Within 15 minutes of talking to somebody, I've got a good sense to their rhythm and their personality. And, you're going to want to speak to some of their past employers to get a sense to some of this stuff as well, to get some good references.
How do you reconcile that view with the opposing view that sometimes I hear, which is, you don't want to hire people that are just like yourself or the team. You want to look for people that bring different things to the table. Maybe they do have, stylistic differences. How do you find that balance, or don't you?
No, I think there's two ways to kind of tackle that. Yes, you want to make sure you can get along with the people around the table, so it's important you get that. But they don't have to be exactly like you. You can easily put an A-type personality and a B-type personality together and see success. You just need to know going in, we've got the A-type salesperson, aggressive entrepreneurial type is going to be paired up with a B-type, demure behind-the-scenes controller type. But maybe those personality types are perfect for those particular positions. Understand you just need to be respectful of each other and their different styles.
Okay. And any other common characteristics that these startup rock stars seem to share?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is you just have to make sure that the employee you're hiring shares the vision for the business that you're building. It's so easy to kind of say, yeah, we're all in the travel business together. We're going to build this great travel company. But if your CEO is trying to build a cruise line and your CMO is trying to build a tour operator,
right,
and they're not perfectly in line with each other, there's going to be wasted resources, wasted time, wasted energies. Just make sure everybody's very clear on what is being built.
So you spend a lot of time ahead of the offer being made to educate and make sure that you're on the same page and share a common vision.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure you've seen this movie before, but what happens when that vision starts to diverge and things in a startup change?
Well, I think it's okay if the vision changes and everybody agrees that the vision is changing. It's making sure that your 4 or 5 senior executives are all in agreement on what it is you're building at that time, right? You don't want to have somebody building various shades of green or various shades of red or blue. We're all building the same shade of navy, or whatever it is.
And let's say one person really fundamentally doesn't agree with the new vision, but they're a valued performer. Is there a way to reconcile that, or do they ultimately, have to exit?
I think first you try to make sure everybody's being heard, right? The most important thing to getting people aligned is making sure that they participate in the creation of that plan. So if they have contributed to the design of the plan and they're theoretically on board, then things will be fine. But if they're not, then you have to consider making that change because you can't have somebody pulling you in a different direction.
We've talked about the characteristics of the senior team. What do you think about the size of the senior team? So is there a number, or you frequently see a head of sales or head of marketing. Sometimes you see it combined in sales and marketing. There's the COO, all these different things. Is there an optimal structure that you have found that seems to work well?
I think every business has its own unique rhythm, but I would say that for the most part, every business needs that quote-unquote CEO that's driving the vision, driving the business, keeping everybody in line and working towards the plan, helping to raise the outside capital and be kind of the outside face for the company. It needs someone to drive new leads and customers into the business.
Yep.
Consumer business, that might be a head of marketing, and a B2B business might be a head of sales that's bringing in the leads. You need the head of operations and customer service so that once the sales are actually closed, we have a good customer experience to deliver on that sale on the back end so that those sales are delivered seamlessly. You need a head of kind of administration, finance, back office, kind of running the back end of the business that doesn't really touch the customer.
Got it.
So those would be kind of 4. The fifth that I would add to that is you have to figure out who your head of product is. Mm-hmm. What is it that you're selling? Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? Because sometimes you'll see it as a separate individual. Sometimes you'll see it combined with marketing. Sometimes I've seen it combined with a head of engineering.
Yeah, for sure.
So where have you found that it lives best?
The more you are a technology company, I think the easier it is to kind of have the head of product sit in the technology side. The more you're a services company, the more that would just kind of sit in the marketing side. But somebody's got to own the product. Somebody's got to have a very clear vision on what are we building, what is this product going to look like in a couple of years from now, and building in new features and functionalities into our roadmap. And can keep everybody excited about where the product is.
Is it safe to say that the founder entrepreneur should play the role of the product manager, product visionary for some period of time? And if so, how do you know when it's time to bring in a head of product management?
I think absolutely in the case in the very early stages of getting the business off the ground, nobody knows the product better than that founder and entrepreneur that's kind of driving that vision. But at some point, you're going to have to, the revenues are going to scale, the business is going to scale, your employee base will scale, and then at some point you're going to have that dedicated product person that will be doing nothing but product.
Another frequent question I get that I'd love your perspective on, George, is sales and marketing. So when does it make sense to have a combined head of sales and marketing versus two individual people?
I think that's the biggest driver there is budget, right? If the business can afford a head of sales and a head of marketing, then clearly I would hire one of each because the skill sets are really, really different. Driving a sales organization is all about hiring the right people with the right Rolodexes and relationships, and knows how to run the sales pipeline and run that customer funnel through to completion over time, and do the nurturing of those leads and the romancing of those leads. Somebody that's on the marketing side, they're about building the brand and knowing how to market effectively through pay-per-click marketing or social media or mobile marketing or whatever the specific tactics are that need to be driving those leads into the organization. So most early stage businesses will have one person leading sales and marketing because that's all they can afford. As the business scales to the point they can add that extra body, they will split that into two.
In a minute, I'd like to talk about how we're going to pay these people, but before we get to that, you talked about sales and marketing kind of being combined. How do you make that transition? So if you're the founder, the CEO of the business, and you start to bring in more specialists, which take away roles and responsibilities from other people that have been doing them. Or another example is you bring in people over other people. How do you do that in such a way that you don't diminish or destroy the ego or self-esteem and retain people, even though maybe they've reached their limit, you need to bring in someone over them that they're going to now report to? How do you manage that kind of transition? Because as a business scales, it would seem like you're doing that frequently.
Yeah, I think one of the ways to do that is if they're truly, and we're going to get to this in a minute, incentivized to see the success of the company, they have to understand you want to have the right jockey in the right role, right? So they need to be aware of what their own skill sets are, what their own limitations are, what the needs of the business in its current form, to make sure that they know that, listen, it's better for the company to get somebody in that right position, even if it's over me, because I'm going to be economically incentivized to see it succeed with my stock options or whatever it is.
Got it. I understand. Okay, let's switch gears now. Paying, money, cash, moolah. So whether we've raised money or haven't raised money, there's certainly not infinite cash. Maybe the business isn't even profitable yet. What are your thoughts or best practices on compensation from both I guess let's talk about, I think about compensation in three buckets. There's fixed cash, there's variable cash, whether it's bonus, commission, whatever, but it's not guaranteed, and then there's equity. So how do you kind of think about, and maybe there are other buckets that you've come across, George, but how do you think about it? What have you found to be the best way to structure it?
All right, and this is probably one of the more complicated topics to address because you just mentioned that there's the salary, the bonus, and the equity compensation. And all three of those kind of work as a lever. There's levers to move up or down on each one of those three channels. So I'll give you a couple examples. So we all know that early stage companies are limited on budget. So it's in the company's best interest to get as low salary as possible because they don't have a lot of excess resources to be investing. So what I typically do when I'm hiring a new early stage executive is I sort of come up with three different options for them to pursue. One is a low salary, super high equity percentage in the business. The second would be a higher salary, low equity percentage in the business, and the third would be somewhere in between. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a sense to kind of how they think, because if they're truly invested in the success of the company and really believe it, you want somebody that really wants that equity. So that's going to see the value of, okay, I'm willing to trade $1 today because it's going to be worth $10 5 years from now. And it really helps you kind of recruit and screen through the candidates that have the best odds of success for that particular
So
role.
you actually give the individual three choices?
I do.
In every case?
Not in all cases, but if I'm making a senior level expensive hire, I certainly will. Understanding, equity is you got to be very sensitive to kind of with your equity, and you don't want to give it out to everybody and anybody. You want to offer equity to people that have a long-term role in the business, that are going to be a long-term driver of its success, that you want to retain, that you don't want to lose because they're critical to doing some particular function inside the organization.
What have you found to be the best way to benchmark or figure out how much to pay? I mean, it's not transparent. It's not like there's a guide for this. You don't want to overpay, but you certainly don't want to underpay.
Yeah, I think a couple of resources. One, I'm good at Googling, right?
Yeah.
It's good to just go online and kind of...
But what are you looking for specifically?
I'll use the word benchmarks. I'll use the word salary, whatever words are going to get me to my end goal, what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good online research. Sometimes industry trade associations built in Chicago or others will publish what the salary benchmarks are for particular positions, whether you're a wide range of technologists or wide range of marketings at different levels. But yeah, benchmarking goes a long way. The second is speaking to your industry peers, right? So, I'm having my HR people kind of talk to other HR people in the industry just to kind of learn a litmus test of kind of what's out there in the marketplace.
Right.
There are also consulting firms that do this for a living that you can hire that will actually tell you where the benchmarks are. The problem is the early stage companies don't necessarily have the budgets for the consulting projects.
Yeah.
There are firms that do this for a living.
Got it. So let's say we do that, and now we figure that we don't have enough money to go around. Enough cash. I'm talking cash. In your experience, do you hire... And we need 4 people, right? Just let's say the 4 that you named. The choices are you hire those 4, just do the best you can, or do I hire 3 and pay them well, above market? Do you have a view on which of those 2 strategies is more likely to attract rock stars and be successful, and also not tank the business because I don't have the right roles filled?
I would rather have the right people in the right roles and make sure that they're incentivized and motivated to succeed. So in that example you gave, I'd rather have the 3 than the 4 because you're betting on their talent, you're betting on their success, you want their long-term loyalty. If you put somebody in that's maybe a B+ candidate instead of an A+ candidate, you're going to get a B+ work product instead of an A+ work product.
Right.
So I'd much rather have the A+ talent building an A+ business.
Got it. So you'd go for the 3, pay them well. I think there's an expression. It's like hire 3 people, work them like 5, and pay them like 4. It's something like that, right?
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
As long as you don't overwork them.
Well, how do the investors fall into this? So let's say we've raised some money. Could be angel money, could be venture capital money, private equity money. Have you found that it's useful or not so useful to include investors in this discussion? How involved do you want your investors and board to be in who you select, how you structure it, how you pay?
I think in terms of who you select and putting in the right person in the right role, that ultimately should be the CEO or the hiring executive's decision. I don't think the board should be messing around in the day-to-day decisions. Where the board comes in is if the CEO says, you know what, I'm looking for a good, strong head of sales or a good, strong head of marketing. You have investments in multiple companies. You've been around a lot of businesses over the years. Who do you know in your network that might be a relevant candidate for us to consider?
Yep.
That would be certainly one way to leverage the board. The second way to leverage them is making sure they're clear that we want to have a stock option plan in place for our employees that will assist us in our recruiting efforts. We're asking you to kind of dilute your own equity investment by setting aside 10 or 20% of the company for a management employee incentive pool. And they'll typically go along with that because they understand the value of a program like that.
Ultimately, if you're in disagreement with the board or investors about a particular hire or one of these decisions, how do you resolve that?
Well, I mean, you have to make your case, right? I like to lead with data. So what is the reason I'm making this decision? What is it about that person's track record or Rolodex of relationships or skill sets for that particular position that makes them the right person for the job?
Yeah.
And then I would ask the board member the same thing. What data and what track record are you looking to that thinks that this is the right candidate for the position? Where this becomes a contentious battle between the board and the executive, most likely is when the board wants to replace that executive. When they want to put in a new CEO and they're the founder, they have the right skill sets to take the business from 0 to 10 million in revenue. but they didn't have the right skill sets to take it from 10 million to 50 in revenue, and they got to bring in a new CEO. So that can get really awkward at times, and making sure that the founding CEO understands that the value of their equity is materially more important than the value of their day-to-day job, and getting the right person in the job to make that equity most successful.
On that last topic that you mentioned, who should initiate that? Should the founder, entrepreneur, CEO be the first to say, I'm not the right person to scale this business to the next level? Does that sound like defeat, acknowledging defeat? Does that sound like giving up to the board? Or should the board be the one that initiates that kind of discussion?
I think 9 times out of 10, I think most founding CEOs think they've got the right skill sets to take the company forever.
Sure,
so,
but that's not always the case.
It's 90% not the case, right? So, I mean, there's very defined skill sets for early stage versus growth stage companies. So it's unlikely that they're going to raise the hand and say that they're the wrong person. But honestly, if they have understood that the business needs certain skill sets and that their skill sets are not the right skill sets for the job, there's nothing wrong for them raising their hand saying, listen, this business has got to a point where I can't handle it anymore, and I've got a new candidate that I want to bring in to kind of take the business to the next level. I think the board very much would appreciate that because they want their investment in the best hands possible.
Got it. It's a very delicate situation.
For sure.
Great. Well, George, this has been incredibly helpful. I know you have a wonderful newsletter and blog for entrepreneurs. How can people find that and get in touch if they'd like?
Yeah, perfect. Definitely check out redrocketbc.com. Click on the blog tab. We have almost 300 different how-to lessons for entrepreneurs to learn how to set their strategies, grow their marketing and sales efforts, fundraise for their capital, etc. So we've been doing this for a few years now, and there's been over 700,000 readers of the blog, and I think they're getting good, useful information out of it.
Great. I've read it. It's fantastic stuff. I encourage everyone to find it at Red Rocket BC.
Yep, you got it.
Fantastic. George, thank you for your time today.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thanks again.
Good to talk.